Jai Baba, New Humanity. I'm going to give a brief description of my coming across Avatar Meher Baba nearly 50 years ago back in Australia, when I first heard of him through a few little of his pamphlets that were circulated at the time. And the words that I read in these pamphlets went straight to my heart, like no other words had ever gone to my heart. I was at art school at the time, and I was reading some of the esoteric philosophers that were popular with the art students. They seemed to struggle with certain points where Baba's words just flowed so naturally, so succinctly, and so precisely. They just went in like milk to a baby. And I read all his works that I could find at the time, and I went to some meetings at Beacon Hill at Billy Page's home there, and I read and I read and I read. And then I had a friend that had travelled through Asia on a bicycle from England right to Australia, all through the Middle East. And he had wonderful stories of overseas and travelling, and that inspired me to think about going to India. But at the time, Vietnam War was on, and I was in the ballot for my birthday to be called out or not. And by Baba's grace, I wasn't pulled out of the ballot, and I was free to travel to India. But at the time, Adi K. Irani had sent out a circular saying that Baba was in strict seclusion at the time, and that nobody should try to contact him or try to see him. And I thought, well, I better not write a letter asking whether I can come and see Baba, because I'm going to get a reply to say, you can't come, you mustn't come, and stay and wait till Baba calls us, which was eventually the great darshan of '69. So anyway, I got a job as a labourer's hand, building trucks to earn my money, to travel up to Darwin, where I travelled up, eventually got up to Darwin, and there I worked in an Aboriginal reserve for the Forestry Commission to get the money to travel across to India. And I travelled at grassroots level with a rucksack on my back, island hopping, deck class on boats, and worked my way up through Indonesia to Singapore, up to Thailand, across from Burma, Rangoon, and then into Calcutta. And I had bought a little camera in Singapore, and I started to take a few photographs. And some of the photographs are of Calcutta. One is a shot of the Howrah Bridge over the Hooghly River, and the next shot is from the railway station there. And the reason that they'll be shown is because they show you what India was like at that time, pre-plastic, pre the pollution that you might find today. And in the second photograph of the Hooghly River with Calcutta in the background, right down in the foreground, you can see the old Victoria carriages, the horse-drawn carriages, which are very similar to the old Wild West stagecoaches that you see in the American films, the horse-drawn carriages. They didn't last long, they were gone, but they were there in Baba's day. And the other shot that you'll see is a composite shot of 4 photographs of a street scene behind Howrah, and I joined them together in a photo editing program which made a wonderful panorama. And they also show the harmony and the simplicity of life back then. You'll see no plastic or styrofoam or anything on the ground. And after a week or two in Calcutta, I got the train across to Bombay. And in Bombay, I spent another few weeks there. I was learning a tabla, learning to try and play a tabla. But while I was there, I would ask about Meher Baba and if he was out of seclusion, if the seclusion had finished. And I told many people didn't know, but eventually somebody said, oh, go to Pune. And so I thought, all right, well, that's my next step, I'll travel to Pune. And I travelled to Pune, and I went to the Pumpkin House, and there was Jal, Baba's brother, and I told him where I'd come from, Australia, and that I was trying to go and see Meher Baba, and he didn't tell me, oh, he's in seclusion and you mustn't go and see Baba at the time. It's not visiting or seeing anybody, he's not dealing with anybody at the moment. He didn't tell me that at all. He seemed to be quite enthusiastic, and he encouraged me. He said, "Oh yes, go and see Addie at the trust office and see what happens from there." And he of course showed me around the pumpkin house and the little room where Barbara had beaten his forehead in that period where he's coming down from his enlightenment, or his awareness of who he truly was. And after the little pumpkin house, I got on the bus and off to Ahmednagar. And I arrived in Ahmednagar on the 5th of August, 1968. And I went straight to Addie Kay's office there to register and to find out an accommodation that was available there. Addie directed me to a little hotel not far from the trust office, just over the road. I don't think it was the popular one that people go to. It was some other little hotel that I went and stayed in. And after I checked in and that sort of thing, I sat down at the desk and wrote a little letter, which the next morning at Addie's office I gave it to Addie to forward on to Barbara. Now, Addie didn't say not to write or anything. He just said, "Well, we'll see what happens. Barbara will see it or he won't see it." So the letter was sent in the mail to Meherabad the next morning, and I just went back to my hotel room, wandered around Naga for a little while. The next morning I went back to his office, and sure enough a reply had come via Erich dictating Barbara's hand gestures. Of course Barbara wasn't speaking, and Barbara's reply was very loving. His usual responses of "my love is with you, to think of him as much as possible," etc., etc. My initial letter to Barbara was a bit formal. I said in the letter, "I'm Bill Redding from Australia, and the words that I've read of yours seem to be the unquestionable truth to me. I'd very much like to meet you." Bill Redding signed it off. A bit sort of a formal, how do you write to God? I didn't know. I was only 20 years of age at the time. And but that didn't seem to matter. Barbara's response was very loving. And so I wrote another letter, and I got the same response. Again, "my love is with you. I'm to think of you, Barbara, as much as possible, and to keep him in my mind all the time." And I wrote a couple of letters like that, but there was no reply to say, "yes, you can come and see me at such and such a date," or anything like that. And so while I was in Addie's office there, I saw him was dealing with some business people, it seemed to me at the time, and I was just waiting out in the compound there. And Donkin lived off to the left-hand side. Addie's office was sort of on the right-hand side as you go in, and Donkin's residence was just off to the left a little bit. He came out and inquired who I was and this sort of thing, and invited me into his room for a cup of tea. And we had many cups of tea, countless cups of tea, to the point I had to decline any more cups of tea. But he did show me his book on the Wayfarers, the God Mad and the Masts that Barbara had worked with throughout the years. And I took that back to my hotel room, and the drawing, or the illustration, I should say, the photograph that was in the first few pages, which was Padre's photograph taken in 1941 of Barbara in the new life. I thought I'd do a little sketch of that. I had a little sketch pad, 5 inches by 7 inches, and I'd do a little sketch of that and send that off to Barbara. And so that night I sketched away right up until about 12 o'clock midnight. And while I was sketching away there, this tiny little mouse came out into the room, and he was bold as brass. He paid no attention to me with my shuffling around, picking up pencils, lighting a cigarette. He paid no attention to me. And I put some leftover chapati on the floor for him, and he got stuck into the chapati. He nibbled on that and finished it off. And I had a funny thought while the little mouse was there. I don't know, it was just an odd thought. I felt that Barbara had taken the form of that mouse to check up on me, to see what I was doing late at night, scratching around on this drawing pad. Anyway, I haven't told that to many people because I think I've gone a bit God mad at the time. But nonetheless, I took a photograph of this little mouse, and he was quite fat and shiny little mouse by the time he'd finished off the chapati, and I'd finished off the drawing, and that was it for the evening. And so the next morning, round to Addie's office, I was with the drawing. I gave the drawing to Addie, and he seemed very happy with the drawing. He seemed to be more happy with the drawing than the letters that I had written. And he said, yes, oh, we'll send it off to Barbara the next mail, and to pop back the next morning, see what happens. And so gave him the drawing, still in the sketch pad. I hadn't ripped it out of the sketch pad, so he had the whole sketch pad, including the drawing. And so I went back to my hotel room, and the next day, round to Addie's office I went, and it had come back. Erich had shown it to Barbara. Barbara liked the drawing very much. She said he was very pleased with the drawing, and more loving words about to think of him as much as possible and to remember him always, that Barbara's love would be with William, myself. And he'd signed the drawing along one edge of the right-hand side. He'd signed the drawing. And I was quite delighted with this. I wasn't expecting it. I just thought Barbara would have a look at it and say, oh, that's a nice drawing, to keep up your drawing and this sort of thing. But he'd signed the drawing. But again, there was still no mention of whether I could see him or not see him. And so that was nice, the drawing there, and I was delighted with that. But many years later, maybe 10, 15 years later, I found out that Barbara had said to the Mundley at the time, I don't know why it took so long for me to find it out, but it took 15 odd years for me to find out that Barbara had said to the Mundley at the time that me signing William's drawing was tantamount to him having had my darshan. So when I found that out 15 years later, the significance of it all kind of dawned on me, the relevance of it. It wasn't like I was in the crowd of people, saw Barbara in the distance and said, oh, well, I've had his darshan. It was Barbara saying, I've had his darshan. So what does darshan mean? What's that word darshan mean? To see him physically, or is it something more? If Barbara said, I am not this body that you see, then it can't mean just seeing him physically. It has to mean something more. So this goes back, makes me think that when I first heard of Barbara, how I just went in, I never questioned Barbara, and in the first few months, you know, when you hear of Barbara, as Barbara said, you can go on a honeymoon with him. Well, that's what happened to me a bit, and for 3 months, when I first heard of Barbara, I would cry myself to sleep every night after reading Barbara's work and just saying, Jai Barbara, Barbara, oh Barbara, oh Barbara, oh Barbara, every night, and I'll cry, and this went on for months and months. So I realised, with one thing and another, that it wasn't me making my decision to go to India to see Barbara, it was Barbara reeling me in. And that's exactly what he did, because when I got to Ahmednagar, there was no problems in contacting him. Even though there was this strict seclusion, Erich said I was extremely lucky that Barbara had allowed my letters and my drawing to be shown to him. But there seemed to be no problem at all. I could write another letter and Barbara would reply, and this went on. Anyway, after I got the illustration back, I hired a bicycle and I rode out to Meherabad. Addie said to go out there and have a look, see Padre and see Muhammad and see the Baba Samadhi out at Meherabad. And I rode the bicycle out there. The road out to Meherabad from Nagar at the time was a dirt road. It was quite beautiful with trees overhanging it. August was the rainy season. There had been lots of rain which had suppressed the dust on the road. So it was a pleasant ride on a bicycle out to Meherabad. And I finally got out to Meherabad and I was introduced to Padre. And Padre, of course, asked me where I'd come from and how I'd heard of Barbara and what I intended to do and this sort of thing. I mentioned to him that I'd written some letters to Barbara and I got a reply and he seemed very pleased with that. Cups of tea were had, lots of cups of tea were had. And then he suggested I go and meet Muhammad. And Muhammad was just it's not like Meherabad is today with all the buildings. It was a bit ramshackle then. There was the main Mundley Hall building there, that was there, but the rest of the buildings were all a bit kind of ramshackle, and I can't now remember exactly where Padre was. But he introduced me to Muhammad. Muhammad at the time seemed to be engaged in something. He was far away, and Padre had to coax him into responding. And he said, "Come on, Muhammad, shake hands with this pilgrim from Australia. Shake hands with him." And Muhammad sort of gradually pulled himself up, straightened out, and pulled a hand out. And the minute I touched his hand, a sort of a shock went through me, a force, a bit like electricity without the discomfort. Only for a few seconds, but a very distinct force. And I think I must have disturbed him while he was engaged in something. But he lightened up after a minute or two and smiled at both of us. And that was it. I said hello to Muhammad, and then Padre asked me back to his room for another cup of tea, and went back into his room, and we were just talking about Baba and Meherabad and the work that Baba had done there. But all of a sudden, my consciousness switched off from all my surrounds. I didn't hear or see anything or anything. I didn't hear Padre. Everything just disappeared from all around me, and in my mind all I saw was a vast ocean, absolutely infinite, far as the eye, vast ocean, absolutely tranquil, not a ripple, absolute, and an incredible sense of peace came over me. I felt this like infinite peace just wave over me, and I broke down, I started to cry. I'd never experienced that sort of thing before. This only lasted seconds, a few seconds, but I remember it so clearly and distinctly today. Eventually I could hear Padre saying, "Oh, you all right? You all right, William? You all right?" And I sort of came to and snapped out, like, "Oh yes, Padre, I'm all right. I'm very sorry." And I was quite embarrassed at breaking down in front of somebody who I'd just met, a stranger who I'd just met. But Padre didn't want to hear about it. He seemed to understand the tears and didn't want to hear about any apologies or anything like that. And of course, more cups of tea were had, lots of cups of tea were had. But suddenly a servant came in with a message for Padre. Padre jumped up and started to berate the servant so severely. I had never seen somebody berate somebody like that before, but he berated the servant so severely, I felt I must be guilty of something myself. But, the servant cowered a little bit, and, obviously some message was passed backwards and forwards, and the servant eventually went. So we had another cups of tea by the dozen were had, but Padre said, "Come on, let's go up and see the Samadhi, Baba's Samadhi." And off we went, past Galori Shah's little shrine down there, and showed me that, and up the winding path to the Samadhi. And I got up there, and Padre unlocked the door of the Samadhi. It was the way it was in Baba's day. It had no annex. There was no other buildings there other than the original buildings, but there was no annex. It was just the meditation cabins on the side, and it was very plain, very simple, and nobody around. Not a single soul could be seen other than myself and Padre. There was nobody there. He unlocked the door and said to go in and have a look, and he went off to some other building with a message or a chore for somebody else. I don't know what it was, but he just left me there. And I started to look at the murals in the Samadhi up on the ceiling, on the walls, and they're all really nice. And then I had a funny feeling, a strong urge to get down into the crypt. And so I did. I got down into the crypt. At one end, where his feet would be now, was a very narrow step, maybe only 4 inches wide, maybe 1.5 feet deep, quite awkward. If you weren't careful, you would fall into the crypt. Anyway, I got down into the crypt, and I crouched down up where Baba's head would be today, and just thought of what it would be like when his body would be placed there. And I envisaged all the people looking in on the crypt, all looking, surrounding the crypt, looking in on Baba. I didn't have any deep spiritual thoughts. They were just thoughts of what it would be like when Baba's body would be placed there. And after 5 or 6 minutes, I got out, and as I got out, I was just looking at the mules, and Padre showed up again and said, "Let's go back, more cups of tea," and he locked the door of the Samadhi and went back down to his little room down there. But before he left, I took a nice photograph of the Samadhi at that time, as it was, which looked beautiful. It had trees around, there'd been rain, so the grass was green, the sky was blue. It turned out to be a lovely shot of Samadhi at that time. So, all right, my time at Meherabad had sort of finished, and I went back to Nagar. That was my little visit to the Samadhi and Meherabad. I didn't go back there again. I rode my bike back to Nagar that day, and that was basically the end of that day. I went to bed that night. The next morning I went round to Addie's office, I think with another little note to Baba, and dropped it off at Addie's office. And of course I would always have to wait till the next morning, because the mail would go out that day in the afternoon and it wouldn't return until the next morning. But Dr. Donkin spotted me there, and he called me over and he said, "William, would you like to go out for a picnic at Seclusion Hill tomorrow?" And I said, "Oh yes, that'd be nice, you know." So he said to pop around early in the morning and we'll go out to Seclusion Hill. So I did that. Next morning I was around there, and Donkin, looking very British. I was surprised at how British Donkin looked for the number of years he'd been in India. He was still very British, with a beret on and shorts on. He had a short sleeve blue shirt on there. He had long socks with a little ribbon around the top and a little red tag on each side of the sock, and a few which looked like medical probes in the pocket, and just in case he needed to probe somebody, I guess. But he got into he had a red Wolseley at the time, again a British vehicle, and off we set anyway towards Seclusion Hill. And would have been a kilometre from the base of Shiva Hill. There's the two hills there. Shiva Hill has the little temple on the top, and next to it is Seclusion Hill. So he pulled up on the side of the road, just about a kilometre from Shiva Hill, and we hiked over towards the Shiva Hill there, and at the bottom of it there we just caught our breath at the bottom of Shiva Hill. Donkin very wisely had hiking boots on. I think I only had chapals on, Indian chapals on. But never mind, at my age I still managed to scramble up. There was no path, but we scrambled over the rocks and worked our way up to the top of Shiva Hill there. And we're looking around. The vista was superb. You could see for miles, and because it was the rainy season, you could see dark skies dropping showers of rain on the earth off into the distance, and then shafts of light falling at some other area down there. Everything looked very green and lush. The fields looked rich and brown, and it was beautiful there. And peering around and that sort of thing, and suddenly Donkin, out of his bag, pulled a pair of binoculars, and he gave me the binoculars to have a look at Meherabad. And so I had the binoculars there. He walked off, left me alone. He went round the side of the temple and left me alone there, and I scrambled up on top of part of the ruins there to get a slightly better view of Meherabad, and spied intently down on Meherabad. "Oh, Baba, are you? Oh, Baba, you're there. Somebody must be." And I didn't see a single soul. I didn't see a servant, a dog, not even somebody who I could have mistaken for Baba. Not a single soul did I see there. And I sort of, my heart opened up, and I just sort of, "Oh, Baba, Baba, I just want something to confirm who you really are, that you're the Christ of the age, the God in human form." I believed unreservedly in Baba, but for some reason or other I felt I just wanted some little thing to galvanise all this belief in him, and I just prayed to Baba for some little thing just to give me that confirmation. And anyway, that was it. Donkin emerged around from the side of the temple there, and we were just about to descend Shiva Hill, when he spotted a large dung beetle on the ground. And quite a large one with a ball about the size of a squash ball or a small orange, quite large. And while we were looking at it, he pulled a large needle out from the lapel of his collar, 6 inches long type of a probe or needle, and pierced the dung and pinned it to the ground. Not the beetle, just the ball of dung that the beetle was rolling around. And he didn't say much, but we looked at this little scenario, this little scene here, and the dung beetle went round and round and round on the axle of the pin. It went round and round and round and around, and then eventually he got under the ball and pushed the ball up and off the needle and proceeded on his way. So Donkin didn't say anything, and why he showed it to me I don't know. I don't know if there's some mystical message I should have gotten out of that little incident or not. But nonetheless, I took a photograph of the dung beetle, and so that's there for posterity anyway. So just as we were about to descend Shiva Hill, Donkin noticed that he'd left his glasses somewhere. He couldn't find his glasses. And I had a funny feeling that he'd left them on a rock at the bottom of the hill where we'd stopped to catch our breath. And I said to him, well, look, Don, I'll go down, and I think you've left them at the bottom of the hill. I'll have a look down the bottom. And I took off, I was only 20 years old, so I took off like a mountain goat down the side of the hill. And when I got down to the base of the hill, I found Don's glasses on the rock where I thought they were. And I was just about to turn around to go back up the hill to tell him, and he was right behind me. He followed me down the hill. He was red in the face. He was sweating. He was totally out of breath. I think Don had thought I was going to make a dash across to Meherabad to see Baba. But that wasn't in my mind. But he saw with the enthusiasm that I dashed down the hill, I think he thought that the Spirit of God, Baba, had gotten into me and I was going to make a beeline to Baba no matter what. But that wasn't the case. Anyway, he realised that as soon as he arrived down there. I had the glasses and I turned around to him. Again, we had to wait a little while for Don to catch his breath. But in the meantime, we could hear a voice halfway from Meherabad out in the field, a voice in a local dialect. And Don and I looked around, and it happened to be a servant dressed in white with 2 dogs on leashes that somebody had sent out from Meherabad to inquire who these loonies were roaming around on the top of Shiva Hill. And Don spoke to him, yelled out something in a local dialect, blah, 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 and the servant responded, turned around and went back to Meherabad. So I don't know what was said in Meherabad, but no doubt whatever the servant observed had gotten back to Baba more than likely. So anyway, Don eventually caught his breath and we made our way over to Seclusion Hill. And that wasn't very far. It was maybe half a kilometre or something across, down a little valley and then across there. It was very barren at the time. There was no trees there. As you see today, it was quite barren. But nonetheless very beautiful because of the rainy season. It had what greenery was there was lush and it looked very nice. And we started to ascend the little winding path going up to Seclusion Hill, and I looked back across to Shiva Hill where we'd come from, and a fantastic rainbow had just emerged. All the sky went dark grey and this perfect rainbow appeared right over the top of the little temple at the top there, and I took a photograph of that. Thank God I did that. Anyway, we walked a bit further up, halfway up the path to Seclusion Hill, and I looked back towards Meherabad, turned around, looked back towards Meherabad, and this rainbow had slowly moved across, so one end of it ended on Baba's house. It went past the ridge, the top of the roof, and it finished in the middle of the roof. It didn't go past the gutter area, but it went past the ridge, it finished right in the middle of the roof. And I just said that, to me, that was Baba's confirmation of who he was, who controls the weather. It was such a beautiful scene. I was just taken aback by it. I was dumbfounded by it. I didn't even have the sense or the wits to take a photograph. It seemed that one little incident was just for me. I turned around to Don, who was a few metres up path in front of me, and he turned around and looked at it, as if it was just a day in the life of his life with Baba. Nodded, "Oh, that's nice." And off we went, and we got to the top of Seclusion Hill. The rainbow had gone, the sun was out, no indication of any rainbow, it had just completely disappeared. And so that was it again. I took a few photographs from the top of Seclusion Hill down at Meherabad, and Donkin had brought a little small picnic basket with a few two thermoses, small thermoses of tea and some snacks, which we had on that slab, all that was left of the Manonash little hut that Padre had built during that period when Baba did the Manonash, the annihilation of the mind. And we sat there. Not much was said between us, a bit of small talk, but we sort of seemed to sit in silence there. And maybe an hour went by, and then it was time to return to Nagar, and that's it. We descended Seclusion Hill and hiked across the field to where he'd parked his car, and we headed back to the trust office in Ahmednagar there. And when we arrived there, Don said an odd thing to me too. I got out of the car, and he got out of the car. He just turned around to me and said, "You are the new humanity." And what that meant was I represented the new humanity. I wasn't the humanity. I just represented that body of people that will come to Baba that haven't actually seen him physically. So what did Baba say? Once he said, it was indeed a great thing to see him physically, but it was far greater to see him inwardly. So for all of those who haven't met Baba, he's given that greater opportunity to them of seeing him inwardly. So how's that brought about? That's brought about by what things that Baba had said to me, to think of him as much as I can, to remember him always, that his love is with us always, and by doing that you bring him into your life as much as you can. You've spent thousands of years with your consciousness going out into the worldly pursuits, and now you have an opportunity to focus on the reality. You are myself, I sing to you in praise. You are myself, I sing to you in praise. He's the reality. So when he says to think of him as much as you can, to bring him into your daily life, whatever little incident, that's focusing on him, focusing on the reality at long last. And of course the advent of the avatar affirms the reality of God. Every time he comes, he reaffirms the absolute reality of God. And that's something quite unique in the whole of humanity. Anyway, so Donkin said that you are the new humanity, and I just will remember that too. And another funny little thing that Addy said to me once when I was in his office, I said to him, I'm not too sure what vocation I should take on in life, what I should do. Being 20 years old, I hadn't settled on whether I was going to be a carpenter or an artist or exactly what I was going to do. And without hesitation, Adi said, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you are honest. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you are honest. And I still remember that today, because when I was very little, 5 years old, my dad used to bounce me on his knee and say, truth is everything. My dad was a journalist, an editor of a paper. He used to bounce me on his knee. So this love of truth was there, and I felt that in Baba's writing, that it was the absolute truth, unquestionable truth. And so I went back to my hotel room, and another night passed. The next day I hired the bike and just rode around Ahmednagar, just sightseeing, taking photographs of the local people and little incidences that I saw, the women washing and a child having their hair cut and a group of children, which I still like very much today. They all turned out quite fine. And so I'd also written another letter to Baba. And in it I expressed that I was thinking of travelling up to northern India. And the letter got sent off to Baba, and the reply came back, Baba does not want you to go up to Nepal, he wants you to return to Australia. Well, I wasn't planning on returning to Australia right now, you know, what's all this about, you know, go back to Australia. And so I quickly wrote another letter the same day and sent that off. And the next day another letter came back, Baba does not want you to go. He wants you to return to Australia straight away. He wants you to go back to Australia right now, taking him with you in your heart, for he is already with you. And he has his nazar on you, and to return to Australia straight away. Well, that was it. That's Baba's telling you a direct order. That day, in the afternoon, I had organised the travel back to Pune by bus, and got my bags, my rucksack all packed up and ready to go. The next morning, I said my goodbyes to Donkin and Addie at the trust office and got on the bus to return to Pune en route back to Australia. And when I got on the bus, it started the motor and started to pull away from Ahmednagar, and I just felt Baba's love. Wave after wave of his love. My heart just broke and tears were falling down my face. I don't know for how long on the trip. For a good hour, I just had to hide my face behind a hat, and I just was crying and crying and crying. And today, I feel it now. And as many people have had a similar experience, that love was, I don't know where or why or what it was, Baba saying goodbye to me or something, but at the time I felt I was leaving my true home, the place where I should truly be, which was Baba, not a place, was Baba, was my true home, my true place. Anyway, eventually I calmed down, just peering out the window, and calmed down. I eventually got to Pune, a little hotel in Pune. The next day I'd organised a train ride to Madras, and I was on the train to Madras. I had my 21st birthday all alone on this train, travelling to Madras. Not a soul around other than Indians, but I felt like I was just on my own. And I got to Madras, and when I got to Madras, I went up and down the wharves to the various shipping agents to find boat passage across to Penang in Malaysia. I was trying to get deck class, which would be cheap and saving money, that sort of thing. I couldn't get deck class, and I had enough money to get a purchase on, it was a freighter, but it had accommodation for about 12 passengers. So we boarded the ship, the HMS Rajula, and boarded the ship, and first enjoyed the first kind of Western meals and a comfortable bed and a nice shower and everything. And it took maybe 5 days to get to Penang. And so that's how I left India, and that was about the 18th of August. I had my birthday on the 15th of August. I was born on the 15th of August 1947, Indian Independence Day. So that's my story of how I came to Baba, and today, nearly 50 years later, not a shred of regret. Don't think twice about Baba. Thank your lucky stars you know about him. Jai Baba. Jai Baba.